Today we're here at the Panzermuseum Munster, and here's Ralf Raths, the director.
Hello.
And we think we talk about a hairy topic because we're specially suited for that. The Holy Trinity of Tank Design, sometimes it's called, because I thought about it a bit and I realized lately it makes very little sense from the military aspect, because if you look, it's like, if you look for a soldier, it's like you look how good he digs foxholes, how fast he runs and how well he shoots. But actually, war is a team effort, so it's all about coordinating and everything. So you can't leave out communications and many other aspects. But what is your take on it?
As much as I wanted to argue with you for the proper entertainment, I agree. I totally agree. The Holy Trinity is a very good tool to start thinking about tanks. It's a good first step. It's simplified. It's simplifying down what a tank has to do, has to bring to the battlefield. But you more think of it, the whole Trinity is actually many small trinities, or even more points each of it. If you look, for example, well, maybe we should explain what the Trinity is for the people who have no idea about it at all. What he refers to as to the Holy Trinity is normally the Trinity of mobility, firepower, and protection. So yeah, we're standing in front of the tank, perfect. How good is it protected? That's generally summarized under protection. How good is the firepower? And how mobile is it on the battlefield? And at this moment, it actually starts not to make sense anymore. Because if you look at, for example, let's choose one, protection, for example. Protection starts with not being seen. Greetings to Monty Python. So people talk about the Trinity, which we're standing in front of, always in good terms of protection because he was so well armored. Yeah, but he was big, tall, huge, large, choose whatever you want. So he can be seen very easily. That's bad. That's a minus in the protection department. Next thing, you can hear him rather well. Because hearing something, you talked about the soldier. He has to be camouflaged, yes, but he has to use the terrain as well. The Tiger, the King Tiger in this case, can't use the terrain very well because he can be seen, he can be heard. And so the first two minuses in the production department. Then you get to the actual protection, which is normally in the minds of most people just the armor. But there's much more to it. People always think about armor thickness. That's a very good point. That's very important. You can see that the King Tiger, very good. There are these overlapping armor plates where you can see the thickness, and that's very important. But the quality of the steel is a whole other matter.
Yeah. So
the German quality of the steel changed over the war regarding what resources were there to better the steel, to forging it. And even then, if the protection is good, if your armor protection is good, what's behind it? So, for example, there's the probability of being hit. If you look at a tank, you can make a diagram of the probability being hit, depending on the decade you're fighting in, the war you're fighting in. They're always different, but you can make a good statistical chance where your tank will get hit. So if you store your ammunition and your fuel in an area where you often get hit, that's bad in the protection department too. So we're at the first point, we're on the outer layers still, and we have, what now, 5 factors?
Yeah.
And we're going in. If you're in there, how good are the interior lines protected? If you, for example, have in the Cold War oftentimes these electro-oil turret mechanisms, hydropneumatisch. If they get hit, if splinter tear them up, you have an aerosol of oil and air. Very bad.
Yeah.
Because just one spark and everything goes up in flames. I mean, that's part of the protection too.
That's also with the vision slits. If you look at the S-35 Sumo, the vision slits actually get smaller, as you see in the video from Chieftain, for instance. Whereas with the Panzers, what I looked from the outside here, they stay basically the same thickness.
Yeah.
So there you have the problem. Or like the Germans has phased hardened armor for the Panzer III, for instance, and the Soviets initially assumed that the 45mm was good enough to defeat them. But then they realized, okay, they have phase hardened armor, and actually their shots were too brittle, and in some cases, so they realized, okay, the 45mm can't defeat the Panzer IV as easily. We have to take the 76, but they have limited armor. So then, okay, protection. And of course, if you harden the armor too fast, it gets brittled as well. Yeah. So it's also not the thickness alone. And then the quality of the steel, of course, as you mentioned, it changed tremendously for the Germans.
Yeah. And let's face it, there are still different opinions. If you have two engineers in the 30s, and they have all the data, they can still have different opinions.
Yeah.
If you look at the armor with the angle, the typical
sloped
armor, the late war, everybody's thinking, we need now sloped armor. And then always people say, but the Tiger hasn't. The typical German design is just cubes and cubes and cubes. There was a good reason for that. I don't saying it was the right reason, but it was a sound argument, because the idea was in the mind of many German engineers that sloped armor can't be formed in a way that the different plates support each other as well. If you have a right angle, if you have two plates and one in front of it, it can, in German it's abstützen, it can rely on the...
Structural integrity.
Yeah, the front plate will be pushed back against the two other plates. They will hold it, give proper backup for the front plate.
And else it can shift upwards, yeah.
If what they did was to these little claws to put the sloped armor together. That was their stopgap, but they were still thinking, if the plate is not really lying with the back on the next plate, like in the classical design, maybe even the thickness won't be enough to stop ammunition. So I don't say these engineers were right, but that was their reasoning, and I find it very important always to see the sense and what people were thinking at the time. You don't have to agree, but far too often people say, that design is stupid. No, they were good paid engineers with good brains. They had their reasons. They could tell you if they were still alive. And
there also the military requirements and everything else to consider. Doctrine, tactics, funding, or like Chifton pointed out, I think for a long time the regulation was due to the weight of how much a regular army bridge could take.
Yes, indeed,
and then they just scrapped it at one point, and then, okay, well.
Yeah, and the thing is, you always train for the next war on the basis of the last war. So you have to make assumptions on what will happen. So the idea, based on what kind of doctrine you have on the battlefield, from where your tank will get hit, is important too. So if you, for example, think very much about artillery, heavy artillery, because you were fighting on the Western Front in 1914, 1918, that's your trauma, you will emphasize top deck armament.
Yeah.
If you haven't lived through this, that's not so important to you. Or if you look at the Spanish experience, maybe from the very limited data from there, you have another idea of where tanks get hit in the 40s. If you look at this one in the 30s, and maybe correct, maybe not, but these are the assumptions the engineers had to work with. And again, it's always my idea to cut them some slack. They thought of things, really. If you look at this, you're a friend of sources. If you look at the actual journals of the times, there's so many journals. The Germans especially had a very open discussion. They discussed everything pretty surprisingly openly. You can see their reasoning. They point out what they think. For example, we always think, how can they argue for cavalry when the machine gun was there in 1914? If you look at the journals, it makes sense. It wasn't right, but it made sense inherently. So please think with the guys who made these tanks. They thought.
So now expanding on the Trinity, for instance, for me it's all about, I mean, from the Heeresdienstvorschrift 470, the German army regulation, basically it's stated in there, tank is never used alone.
Yep.
At least a platoon strength, so 4 tanks at least, Zug. And so if you think about this, you can't, from my perspective, you can't cut communication out at all.
Indeed.
Because if you want to wave to each other while you buttoned up in this tank, I mean, not sure how you wave to each other if you're buttoned up. So you need to communicate in some way. So at least you need to add communication, I think.
You do. And reliability, maintainability, that's too important. And now comes the question, how broad do we make the focus?
Yeah.
But actually, you think about...
Tactically, operational, strategic,
indeed,
grand strategic.
But at some point, you have to say also, it doesn't matter if your Trinity of protection, armor, and firepower is perfect, if you just have, let's say, 489 tanks. So production is an aspect too. Yeah,
how well suited it is for mass production, but then you also need to look at the resources of the country involved.
True. And that's the point I think we're both aiming at. Once you start to think things through, so many factors come into play that the Trinity doesn't make sense at all at some point. I would argue indeed that it clouds the idea of what tanks were on the battlefield at the time, because it makes you think of let's say, Trump ace card playing. If you're what we call in German the Panzerquartett, the Trump ace card game.
Okay.
If you have these cards with a tank on each card and say, I have 490 horsepower, I have 330, damn, and you change cards all the time. And that's what people, that's the figure of thought they have if they think in the Trinity as a value set, because in their mind it's always a duel, because you have, let's say, a caliber of 88 and a front armor of whatever, 120 or 200 or whatever. So you think of the one tank countering the other tank, and at that point that nearly never happens.
Yeah, it rarely happens. There were
rarely. So
tank battles. Hanut was one of the earliest ones.
But you know what I mean. You actually have to remind yourself of the context. Who are they fighting with? And one thing we completely left out, which is far, far more important than anything else, I think, is training. The crews, the squishy stuff inside. A tank does nothing without the crew in it.
The problem is, for me, the training, I agree on it on a certain level, but it goes outside of the tank design for me. And this is what I want to point out. I think what I usually try to do in my videos is set a very clear scope. Like when I compared the Panzer III with the T-34, I said, I take the tactical approach. And I assume that the tank was built up to specifications and left the factory this way. Of course, I accounted for for instance, bad steel to a certain degree. There's always the discussion. And then you can say, okay, well, let's go for the operational level. Then you put in, for instance, range, because I didn't put in, on a technical level, I didn't put in range, but on the operational level and strategic level it's important. And on a strategic level also mass production is important, which on a tactical level you don't care. But even if you stay in the tactical level, you need to account for visibility and communications, because else you can't have tactics without communication, and if you can see the enemy, you can fight him. So this is what I would be going, because if you go for the whole thing, if you do tactical, operational, strategic, and everything else,
you lose scope, yes.
then you have training, you have reliability, you have fuel situation, you have the discussion, even fuel, go with diesel, go with regular fuel and everything else.
Okay, agreed. But then again, I think the as somebody you called it, the squishy stuff inside, the people in the tank, are very important while designing the tank. Well, actually,
for the ergonomics, I agree completely. For the ergonomics, I agree completely.
Because they are kind of the they are kind of mechanical part of the tank, and how they can work and how they can fill their jobs. But still, I think, I don't know why, I can't put my finger on it yet. But I think if we ignore the min inside, I'm just thinking loud. We don't get the whole picture of the tank. We can't.
I don't think ignore the man inside. I would say you ignore the training. I say ergonomics and fightability. I think it's shifting course is very important.
Yeah.
But
agreed.
if you account for the training, you have the problem at which point in time you look at it.
Yeah.
So because training is way too dynamic.
Yeah, indeed.
And it doesn't really relate to a tank. And for instance, if the ergonomics are very well designed for a tank, you can put everyone in. Like Chifton says, he's a rather tall guy. And he says, I fit perfectly well on a Panzer III. And so we know that Germans, who were smaller back then than they are nowadays, and they're generally smaller than Chifton from what I know, have definitely no problem in it, likely. Whereas in the T-34 he had major issues. So I assume more or less that the doctrine to a certain degree is also reflected in the design already. For the training, I wouldn't put it in there. I mean, Zaloga put it in there, but this is the issue. Then he downgraded the Panther, I think in 44, 45, because the training was abysmal at this point, which I completely understand and agree.
Indeed.
But it doesn't. I don't stay with the tank anymore, because there's so many other factors already which you can look at still, even without accounting for the training. Because ergonomics alone, there's very often not enough information out there already. So just stay with the technical aspects and the technical. And once you have everything covered there, I think you can write a whole book about this, and it might be a real thick fool. Yeah. And then when you have covered this, then you go for the operational level, for instance.
Yeah, that's the next thing.
But that's more my structured, more Austro-Prussian approach to everything. Do it step by step and mostly right to a certain degree.
One thing you can't forget that this is the grade of the expected training. When you design the tank and you're an engineer, and what training can you expect your future crews to have?
That's a good point.
That's, I think, but this merges with ergonomics.
Yeah,
at some
I think
point.
that merges.
For example, steering wheel or levers, for example, and how many things to push and pull, and how many things they have to master while in the heat of combat. But again, that borders on ergonomics, but it kind of, the training plays a role in the design of the tank at this point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. So basically, we have now a Trinity. We have what? We have at least. I mean, I boiled it down to 5 factors. So visibility and ergonomics I put in there as well.
Yeah.
No. Visibility is part of ergonomics and communications.
Yeah.
Would you add another factor on the tactical level? Apart
from the maintainability, no. That's
would you count maintainability on the tactical level already?
Yes, indeed. It's the question: how many jobs can the crew perform on themselves?
Yeah.
At which point do they need a specialized crew? And what can they do themselves? If the tank is designed in a way that they can easily master several breakdowns or change things, they are, even on the tactical level, quicker on the battlefield back again.
Yeah.
That's all. I don't think it makes a major difference, but many little difference are a major difference. So maybe that. Yeah.
Yeah, maintainability, because reliability in general is more operational factor, I would say again.
Look at the first usage of tanks at the Somme. I mean, there you have 50 tanks.
Yeah, okay.
And 30 breakdown even before they even start to roll out.
Yeah, okay.
So that's extreme, of course, but it shows that reliability is even in the small scale important.
So was reliability also a tactical issue in World War II to that degree that so many basically broke down from the assembly area to?
Nah, I don't think so.
So you would say reliability like a tactical level for World War I tanks, but for World War II or post-war likely not anymore.
Not by far, not so much for sure. I think that's the main reason why the tanks are so important in World War II and not in World War I. Everybody says it. Machines, transmissions, everything was better in World War II, technically, mechanically. So the tanks actually worked. So that's an argument that's not so important. But then again, if we are talking about the tactical level, we are just talking about 2 or 5 or 10 tanks, maybe 50 if it's really going out there. And for them it's important. I mean, for each tank, reliability is important because if your machine or transmission breaks down, it's your fate in that moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know at which point it really makes an impact on the next level, but on the tactical level, I think it's very important because, yeah, for example, if you decide to climb or not to climb a steep hill because you know your transmission can or can't take it, that makes a tactical difference.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And one word, then again, the training comes into play again, because a good trained crew member knows what his tank can do and can't do. The guy who has just 2 hours training and is thrown in the tank and thrown to the front will take the steep hill anyway, and the transmission will break down, and one more tank breaking down because of bad training and transmission problems.
Yeah, that's tricky. I don't want to have training in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's all serves the same point we make at the beginning. It's all interlocked. Once you start thinking, it defies easy concepts like trinities or I mean, it's this concept of communicating factors. So you have more mobility, so you have less armor. Generally true, but not.
Yeah, then you decrease the side armor or you slope something.
Yeah, it's true, but it's so, at this level, it's so generic and so overview-like. It doesn't do anything. You can scrap this explanation because it doesn't explain anything. It's just a nice talking. So to sum it up, in short, it's complicated. Very. That's why we're here in Germany at the Panzermuseum. So big thank you here, Ralf. My pleasure. The next time. And see you next time.